what terrible tragedy, you know, on behalf of everybody, not just on behalf of my profession, but on behalf of humanity in general. It's a devastating story. It's simply heartrending.
And of course, we don't know all the details, but it appears that the social worker did everything they could to try and make contact with Kenneth.
From my understanding of the legislation, it certainly does appear that way. We've got a social worker who returned to work, like you, I, and many of our viewers watching this will have done, that have taken the Christmas break off. Social worker comes back to work on the first day back at work on the 2nd of January, attempts to make contact. When they cannot make contact, they do the correct thing and make contact with the police. Obviously, we haven't heard yet from the police. We do know they've referred themselves to the Independent Police Commission. We'll wait and see what happens there. Social worker then 48 hours later makes further attempt and contacts the police again. We then have a weekend. The social worker comes back on the Tuesday and has to, under their own volition, does not appear as if the police intervened at that point. The social worker has had to go to the landlord. Now, that's no easy feat, to track down the landlord, find the key and gain access themselves. This social worker, from my reading, the limited information we do know now, appears to, from my belief, have done everything they could have to try and get access to the home.
So, in your experience, if a social worker makes that call to the police and asks for a welfare check, how quickly would you expect police to act upon that?
Ultimately, Jonathan, it depends on the proportionate use of police powers at the time. On this occasion, the social worker is going to be contacting the police officer, and I can only imagine this scenario, but they're going to be saying, we've got a child who has been placed with their father. If the child has been placed with their father, there would very likely be significant risk of harm, otherwise the child may not have been placed there. The police are going to have to make a judgment call on that occasion. But on this occasion, it does not appear as if there was any evidence that Bronson was at risk himself. I want to be very clear to those who are watching this who may try and conflate this with other situations we've seen on the news, such as Daniel Pelker, Baby P, Victoria Climbier, more recently Star Hobson and Arthur Labinjo Hughes. Those are cases when you could look at that and you could say, well, actually, there was a smoking gun here. There was somebody in that home who posed a risk. There was somebody who was causing abuse. There was a child in the case of Baby P, Peter Connolly, who turned up at hospital with many bruises that were missed. We haven't got any of that here, Jonathan. What we've got here is a child who was at home with their father, who must have been deemed safe to look after him. And it does believe, on my reading at least, that this is just a tragic, tragic accident.
But even so, you'd expect, wouldn't you, the police to take more of an interest and much sooner? I mean, to have two people lying dead for 2 weeks is sort of unfathomable.
Well, ultimately, I think what you, I, and people looking at this story right now would have to suggest and have to question is, at what point do we knock a door down? At what point do the police use their powers? And the end of that power is breaking in to a private residence. Now, we have lots of human rights under the European Convention of Human Rights. We have a right to a private life and a family life. So I think what we would have to question here is how many knocks on a door must go unanswered and how many phone calls must go unanswered before we take a serious step of saying we are going to break into that property. Now, yes, we may very well argue that may have saved Bronson on this occasion. We hope it would have.
Yeah.
But what we have to question is, what would the public stand? Would the public stand their door being broken down and police and social workers gaining access to their property after 1 failed visit, 2 failed visits, 3 failed visits? How many people would stand that for the sake of saving a child in this extremely unlikely and awfully tragic situation?
Yeah, I mean, another question which many people might be asking is how concerned were the social services by what was going on in this family? And of course, we don't know the individual circumstances, but to have a visit on the 27th and then to have another visit just 1 week later, does that mean that alarm bells were ringing, that there was concern about this family, or is that quite normal?
Well, we only know very scant information about this, Jonathan. What we know is that there was a fallout between the mother and father. We've got information they fell out sometime around Christmas. We do know that Bronson was recently placed with his father. We have comment from a neighbour who says that Kenneth was looking forward to trying to be a good dad. And we do know there was social services involvement. Other than that, there's very little else we can say. But in terms of what more could be done, The average visiting frequency for a child who is known to children's services will generally lie somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks. On this occasion, you've got a social worker who has attempted to visit multiple times over a 2-week period. From my belief here and what I can see, this social worker appears to have not only done what they should have done, but in the context of most children who would be living with a birth parent, appears to have maybe gone above and beyond.
Yeah, and of course our thoughts are with that social worker, aren't they, today, who discovered those bodies. Questions too, I guess, broader questions about society and what we know about our neighbours and people in our community, but that's perhaps for another time. Vincent Peart, social worker, thank you very much indeed. Good to speak to you.
Thank you for your time.